how resource rich should the ecosystem or the environment or the processes, Sharon, to your point, or Martin, the expectations from a leadership development, how resource rich and disciplined does this process need to be to get to the outcomes I think all three of us are talking about, where we connect leadership development to business growth?
When I think about like setting up a system that's maybe helpful, I go to this idea of like, and maybe it's because I'm a big company person, but like businesses do what they measure, right? And so, I think people intuitively know that good leadership measures, or good leadership matters, but historically it's been really hard to prove that, frankly, with data, or maybe just people haven't taken the time to do that. And it also was kind of hard to measure. If it's episodic and it happens once a year, like it's not going to sit nicely side by side with your business KPIs of, revenue growth, penetration, new accounts gained this month, right? So I do think it's rare to see those leadership goals kind of elevated to that. And so one of the things I would love to see is for us to get there. So like as a person who's kind of in the customer experience space, I love how we're starting to see CX measures like NPS or loyalty or satisfaction kind of be in those business KPIs, kind of reported with the same frequency, going to board of directors, kind of given that amount of rigor. And I feel like we just have an opportunity to do the same thing with some of those experience scores. And, that is maybe the first step. I think that, the next step is just a more nuanced understanding of what those scores can mean, right? We know that a good customer CX is going to lead to good business revenue. I mean, I think it's actually easier to say that poor CX leads to attrition. So that's kind of how it's easy to make that argument, right? But we also, in some of our early work here, it's clear that a positive employee experience does lead to a positive customer experience, especially if you're looking at frontline, like people who really engage with customers every day. And so if we know these things are true, if we know that good employee experience leads to good customer experience, which leads to revenue growth, then we've got to start thinking of leadership metrics or customer or employee experience metrics as being kind of, either leading indicators to growth or at least a way that we can understand our business and unpack, the same way you might unpack other sources of revenue growth or decline. And so for me, that's probably the long-term vision, but I feel like it starts with like, let's just get some KPIs on the page.
So I'm just curious from your perspectives, your organizations, and once again, not asking you to give away stuff, obviously, no proprietary stuff, but to the extent that you can share, what and how are you all doing that within your organizations? Like, how are you bringing that customer experience front and center, or people effectiveness front and center that then measures impact on business? Could you share a couple of thoughts on that real quick? Martin, Sharon?
I could share a couple that are more general over a couple of roles, actually. So I've seen both NPS or NPS type metrics, and also you might call them equity or CX type metrics, and they've sort of been along a continuum. And then I've seen them sit in isolation, and they're not terribly helpful in isolation. And actually, one of the reasons I got interested in the space that I'm in today was doing some work in a previous role, looking at both the impact of the equity component and also NPS, and actually, interestingly, price elasticity against the employee experience part, and then actually how that impacted company performance. And what you discovered is there are ways of actually linking those things, and that you can actually kind of build a mental model of how those pieces connect and how they actually drive success for the company as well as success for the individual. And so what I've been kind of noodling over the last couple of months is, especially from the employee experience perspective, how do you capture that in such a way that you're able to influence it? And then what are the fast moving indicators of where we are at any point in time, so that you don't kill people through surveys or kill people through the various feedback loops that we ask people for, but that there are other indicators that in some cases maybe passive indicators that help us understand, well, actually this is where we are, this is where our customer is, this is where our employee is, which at least gives us a sense of, are we headed in the right direction? And I think, especially the world we find ourselves in today with, I don't know if we're still calling it the Great Resignation, but certainly
not
people
anymore,
thinking
apparently.
about, yes, but certainly thinking about people thinking about their roles in a different way and thinking about, what they want to do next in a different way. Having a fast feedback on what's happening becomes even more important, even if it's not perfect. And I have been joking over the last couple of weeks that we have a measure of perfection. We know when an employee is very upset or they're not enjoying their work on the day they resign. That's the day that we have the perfect measure, the perfect metric. So now let's look back 3, 6, 9 months and try and figure out what the leading indicators might have been that moment was about to come, and then think about how we can actually connect that. And interestingly, it was interesting. So, a soft drinks manufacturer I used to work for, how we could do that through looking at things like price elasticity, and you could start to see actually that could be a leading indicator of a whole load of stuff that's about to come down the line.
Yeah. Sharon, anything to add to that, or?
It's funny that you say the leading indicator. It brought up a story of mine when I was younger and had just recently had a baby and was at the office really late one night. A coworker walked by and I was wearing fuzzy slippers, and she was like, "I knew you were going to quit." She was right. I did quit. So the fuzzy slippers in the office after 7 when your baby's at home was my leading indicator for my exit from that particular company. But I love that idea of the leading indicator, but also what you said, Martin, I think that's really important is like we also don't want to exhaust people with too much kind of survey type feedback. So how can we pair, and I think this is true for CX and EX, like the scores alone are like frankly boring, but how could you pair them with other behavioral measures or passive measures that help you paint a full picture that really brings to life the situation? And so I think we also as researchers owe that to people to turn to sort of less invasive ways of collecting information, but then also linking it all so that it can be powerful, but not draining on the employees. And so I feel like that data connection is really important part of how do we get those leading indicators as we go forward.
And my experience, again, listen, like I said, we're not inventing the wheel here. We all know that there's ways to connect leadership development to business impact, but the way that they've been deployed have always been in this very cumbersome, resource-rich, expensive, long, drawn-out, longitudinal, granular data collection. I would say nightmares, right? And this is the disincentive, right? This is a disincentive, and this happens when leadership development is episodic, or at least the understanding how leadership development drives. So what we would say to that is we would say, no, if you've actually created the ecosystem the right way, you can actually create it in a light enough and agile enough way that you can get continuous feedback, design it into your culture, design it into your system so that you keep going, so it's not episodic, right? So once again, when you do that, then it's like, it's part of the culture. Martin, you said that earlier on, like, how do you imbibe this into the culture, into the practices, into the behavior?